Hi everyone, I'm Aidan Michaels, and today I'm joined by the legendary San Jose Sharks play-by-play announcer Randy Hahn. Randy, welcome and thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure, Aidan. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So the first question, and I've heard and read stories of many announcers who started off calling high school games and whatnot, but you had a rather unique beginning, I would say. Just to go from the start here, talk to me about calling dog sled races.
Yeah. Well, when I was young, uh, just going into high school, our family moved from Edmonton to a town called Whitehorse. It's in the Yukon Territory up by Alaska. And I got a chance when I was still in school, when I was just 15, to work for a radio station. And our town, Whitehorse, has and still does have a winter carnival called the Sourdough Rendezvous. It's in the middle of February, the coldest time of the year in that part of very cold Canada. And they had a dog sled race, and they needed someone to provide some of the commentary along the route. Obviously, something I'd never done before. And they positioned me high above the Yukon River on a bluff overlooking the river valley. Of course, the river's all frozen over, and the dog sled race is partially on the river, and then the race continues off onto trails, etc. And I had a local native Indian chief of a tribe, uh, George Van Bibber, and he knew all about the dog teams and the mushers, as they call them, the drivers. And he even knew about the dogs. So I was up on a bluff doing kind of play by play with him. I knew nothing about it. He knew a lot about it. And that was the first time I did any kind of description of a live sporting event. And when you're freezing to death, calling a dog race on the Yukon River, I guess it can only get better after that. But that was my rather humble beginning doing any kind of play by play.
That's amazing. I love it because I think any young announcer should always take any opportunity they can get, especially at such a young age. Would you say that versatility is one of the more important traits to have as an announcer, just being able to do pretty much everything, even dog sled racing?
Yeah, for sure. There's I get a lot of people that contact me, and young people and students and people that think they want to go into broadcasting or know they do. And I always tell them try and do everything because it will broaden your abilities. And really, what our job is as play-by-play announcers is to be able to ad lib. If you're doing a hockey game or whatever kind of broadcast it is, it's usually a 2 to 3 hour broadcast. There's no script. It's not like a sports anchor in a studio reading off a teleprompter. You have to make it up as you go along, just based on what you see. So you're much more well-rounded if you've done a little bit of everything. And I certainly was one of those people who got to dabble in a lot of different sports before I settled in primarily into doing the NHL.
Yeah, and I do want to talk hockey, of course, but I'm also a huge soccer fan. So obviously you went from calling games for the Drillers in Edmonton, doing some work with the Men's World Cup in '90, and then calling the final of the first ever Women's World Cup. Have you always been a soccer fan, or did the Drillers kind of start that for you?
The Drillers started that, but even before that, when I was in Vancouver going to college and also working at a radio station there, the Vancouver Whitecaps in the NASL were a big deal. They won the Soccer Bowl. And that sort of was my entree to having an interest in soccer. I covered them. I didn't do play by play of them. And then when I got to my first TV job in Edmonton, I got a chance to do the Drillers both indoor and outdoor. And the indoor soccer game is much like hockey: three forwards, two defenders, and a goalkeeper. And it's actually played on a hockey rink with AstroTurf on top of it. So that's sort of where I got my teeth really into soccer. Moved on from Edmonton to San Diego, where I did the San Diego Sockers for 10 years. And that's also where I then developed an opportunity to do World Cup, both men's and women's. U.S. national team. I did most of their games for a couple of years. So to say I always loved soccer, I wouldn't say that. But it became my primary play-by-play job for the better part of a decade before I was doing hockey on a regular basis.
And with that '91 World Cup, obviously at that time, women's soccer and even professional soccer in general in the United States wasn't very big, I would say, obviously compared to the other big sports, football, basketball, baseball. What was that experience like to be able to call that incredibly monumental moment for American soccer, that cup final?
Well, the 91 Women's World Cup was not. It wasn't even called the World Cup back then. It was the last time it wasn't officially called a World Cup by FIFA. They called it the Women's World Championships. It was in Guangzhou, China. And at that time, it was just kind of, Brandy Chastain was on that team, but she wasn't even really a primary player. Michelle Akers was one of the big stars. Karen Jennings Gabara, she was a big star on that team. And it sort of was the launching off point for then that team that Brandy was on that won the World Cup on U.S. soil, and where she ripped off her jersey and had the Nike sports bra underneath, which was an iconic moment after they won that World Cup. So it was the World Championship before that, but it turned out to be monumental, as you say, because it was the precursor to the women's game really taking off in a huge way. So it was tremendously exciting. Ricky Davis, who was a U.S. Soccer star with the New York Cosmos, he played with Pele and was a national team mainstay on defense. He was my color commentator. And it was a great experience going to China, doing those games. But it wasn't certainly as big a deal. It wasn't televised in the way that the later World Cup was, live on ABC. The one I did was on Sports Channel America. It was a more dialed down event until you got there, and the stadium was full of 70,000 fans in China watching the final game between the U.S. and Germany. So it was a great experience for me. And then it led to me. I had already done the Men's World Cup in 1990 for TNT Sports. That was their first ever live sporting event when TNT first came on the air in 1990. And then I went on to do the World Cup in 1994, the Men's World Cup for ABC and ESPN.
What an experience. And I know around that same time, early 90s, you were a big part of that group that brought hockey to San Jose. So how did that come about?
Well, my wife and I were moving to the Bay Area. She had accepted a job in San Jose. And so we started to pay attention to Bay Area news, Bay Area sports. And there was an article in the paper in the San Jose Mercury News about a group of hockey enthusiasts that wanted to try and bring the NHL to San Jose because the city of San Jose was about to vote on building a new arena, which is now SAP Center. So once we moved to the San Jose area, I got in contact with those guys, and they were kind of going to be the fans who put on hockey jerseys and stand in front of City Hall and say, "We want a team" type thing. And we decided to take a different approach once we got involved with them, and we formed a nonprofit corporation. The sole goal of which was to promote the NHL coming to San Jose. And we eventually got in to meet with the mayor and approached it from a more professional standpoint. And then we built alliances in the NHL. I was already working in the NHL with the LA Kings by that time, not doing play-by-play. I was the studio host on television. Bob Miller, of course, longtime play-by-play voice and Hall of Famer, was the TV guy in those days. So we eventually moved it along to where investors became interested. We were contacted by a number of groups that wanted to get the rights to San Jose if the league expanded. There was still no guarantee they were going to at that time. But long story short, the arena passed. The NHL announced it was going to expand, and San Jose was selected. So played a part in that, and it was very exciting. And I guess in a long roundabout way, because we're talking about something that happened in 1990-ish. So about 35 or 36 years ago, I kind of had a hand in creating my own job. So it worked out great for me, and it's turned out to be the job I've held the longest in my life. I'll head into my 34th season this year.
Wow, that's amazing. And I know when you started doing games for the Sharks, uh, you were not splitting games. You would know the split obviously, but with Joe Starkey, and whenever he was absent, you would do those games. Did you know that you were going to be the full-time guy eventually when Joe Starkey moved on?
No, I didn't. The first 2 years, as you correctly say, I was the fill-in guy for Joe. And for those who don't know, Joe Starkey, his probably most famous call is "The Band is on the Field" in the legendary Cal Stanford football game, where the band came on and the game wasn't over yet. And tuba players got knocked to the ground and things like that. And Joe had that iconic call of that moment in that big rivalry game for Bay Area football. He had prior to that been the play-by-play voice of the Colorado Rockies, who were an NHL franchise, believe it or not, way back in the day, and then they eventually moved to New Jersey and became the Devils. So he had a hockey background. He was also the radio voice of the San Francisco 49ers for many, many years. Cal football, Cal basketball. So he was kind of the iconic play-by-play voice in the Bay Area. And when the Sharks first came into being, I think they wanted somebody with that name recognition factor. So despite my being involved in Pro Hockey San Jose, bringing the franchise in, I was not hired as the play-by-play guy. And that was devastating because I thought I was going to be. But they did use me to fill in for Joe because he had all those other conflicts with the other sports. So the first 2 years, I would do probably 15 of the TV games each season. And in those days, the Sharks weren't televising every game. So they maybe had a 50-game package. Joe was doing 35, I was doing 15. And then after the end of the second year, they wanted a, a, a permanent voice on TV. They knew they were going to be expanding their coverage to cover more games, eventually to do all of them. And they wanted that person who was going to do all of them, not miss a lot of games. So I think they talked to Joe about that, and he wasn't prepared to walk away from his NFL or college sports gigs to just do hockey, understandably so. And when he turned that opportunity down, they then gave it to me, gave me the opportunity. And of course, I wanted to do it. And that was the beginning of what's been this long run for me in the chair.
Wow. And I've heard your voice a lot growing up. I must admit I'm from LA, so I'm a Kings fan. So I cried many tears of as a child when the Sharks would terrorize the Kings. Very bad for me. So out of all of those players who loved dominating the Kings, Marlowe, Thornton, Pavelski, Couture, Burns, etc. Obviously, Marlowe and Thornton's numbers are in the rafters. Who do you think is next?
In the rafters,
Mm,
I don't know that. I don't know that. Um, I don't know that Joe Pavelski will get there. He might, but didn't finish his career with the Sharks. And you know, when you don't win a Stanley Cup, and I think that's why it took so long for the Sharks to put somebody in the rafters,
mm,
that that standard wasn't met. So then you have to have other comparables to regard a player. But I think the two that are up there, Marlowe and Thornton, are 100% correct and valid. And after that, I don't know. Maybe it will be Macklin Celebrini, but gosh, he's 19 years old, and that's I don't want to put something like that on him. But he might have the best chance to be that next guy. I just don't know that players like Pavelski, Burns, even going back Nabokov, I don't know that they meet the very high standard that the Sharks correctly set when they said, look, if we're going to put names in the rafters and numbers up there, we want them to be legitimate and not just do it for decoration. So the standard was high, and it took a long time for anybody to go up ever. And the first were Marlowe and then Thornton. And I'm not sure there's somebody that jumps off the page to be next.
I see. Yeah. I mean, that, again, just going back on that rivalry from those years, that was fun. Looking back on that Cup final season, 15-16, I know many regional networks, I know this happened with Bob Miller and the Kings, and those Cup runs, they weren't able to broadcast the Cup final. Were you still able to call those games maybe on tape, or did they
No,
allow you? Not at all.
no, I think that if it would have gone to a deciding game, as in where the Sharks could win the cup that game, the Sharks probably would have partnered with NBC regionally here to do a game to tape so that just for archival purposes, they would have the call of their announcers doing the Stanley Cup final. It wouldn't have aired because the rights holders are entitled to exclusively air those games nationally. So that might have happened. But as it turned out, the Sharks never got to a game where they had a chance to win that night. So hard to say for sure. But I was involved in pregame coverage, intermission coverage, things like that. They traveled us to the Stanley Cup final in Pittsburgh, those games there. But no, Dan Rusanowski, our radio play-by-play, would have had the Sharks live on the air call, and then of course the network broadcasters called the game that Pittsburgh eventually won in San Jose to win that cup.
And I know you've called some national playoff games on TNT in the last few years. After calling so many Sharks games over the years, Did you find it at all difficult to maintain the same high energy when either team scores? It's a non-Sharks game, I suppose.
It is a challenge. Your heart's not in it the same way as it would be for a game that the Sharks are in. I think you have to transport yourself to get your head to that space. Um, and it is a national game, so you're speaking to both audiences in that moment. And if you go over the top for the home team, for example, which is easy to do because you have the crowd behind you when they score, then the fans watching that care about the visiting team are going to be on you for being a homer. So it's a challenge. I've been asked many times, would you rather be a national guy or a local team guy? And I always answer, I'd rather be a local team guy because I have skin in the game. I care who wins.
Yeah.
And when you just do national games, all you care about is you hope it's a good game. You don't care who wins. And I like to care who wins and be part of a team and be pulling on the rope along with everybody in the organization, top to bottom. It's the highs are higher and the lows are lower, but the roller coaster ride is what makes the journey so much fun.
I fully agree. And I know you get used to calling games with the same few people and you build up that chemistry over the years. And I know how important it is to have the chemistry with the people behind the camera as well, producer, directors, etc. When you called your first set of TNT games, was it hard to get used to the new faces and voices, or was it similar enough to not cause any problems?
It was similar enough, and as I recall, when TNT first used me, I was doing games with Brett Hedican, who was my normal TV partner at that time. They kind of kept us together as a team. weren't doing Sharks games, obviously. They weren't in the playoffs, haven't been for 6 years, but that made it a lot easier. But, when they bring color commentators in, they're usually guys that work at the local team level. There's rarely somebody who's inexperienced sitting in that chair next to you. They're your friends, they're your colleagues. You see them all the time during the season. So it usually takes, half a period. And then you're in the groove. You get to understand them. They're used to working with a play-by-play guy. They know when to get in, when to get out, how to handle a highlight, how to let the play-by-play kind of guy be the traffic cop and get you in and out of commercial breaks and promos and things like that. Those guys are also skilled that we all get used to each other quite quickly.
And so, as an aspiring announcer myself, I do have a couple questions that would perhaps help the future generations of announcers. But let's paint this picture. One team is up 5-0 with the entire third period to go. How do you keep the viewer engaged?
Well, that's the challenge. And that's where your research comes in and your preparation. When it's a good game, and especially in the playoffs, even if it isn't a good game, but in a good game, I rarely refer to my notes and go into what I've prepped or talk about stats because the game carries you from whistle to whistle. It's you're in the moment. But as you suggest, when a blowout seems apparent, that's when you do have to dive more into what you've prepared. And also, if you have a good relationship with your color commentator, a good chemistry, as I've been lucky with Drew Remenda and even before him, Jamie Baker and Brett Hedican. I've been so lucky to have great color commentators over the years. Pete Stemkowski, way back in the beginning years with the Sharks. Then you work together to keep the viewer engaged. And it's tough to be funny if your team's down 5-0. But even if you're up 5-0, uh, you have to keep the viewer from turning it off saying this game is over. So, it comes with experience. You try to have some fun together, try and bring some stories to the table, and also keep in mind that the game isn't over. And as we've seen in the Stanley Cup playoffs this year, games that seemed over all of a sudden weren't. Even when teams were down by 3 or 4 goals in playoff games, they either made a game of it, or in some cases, especially Edmonton, the comeback kings, were able to turn it into a win. So that is the challenge, though, being prepared for those moments and trying to hold the viewer, because in the end, that's what we're all about. We're an entertainment product. We are trying to sell commercials. That is a reality. And if people aren't there to watch the game because they leave because they think it's a blowout, then maybe you haven't done your job as well as you could. So that's certainly something that we're mindful of in those moments. And our producers are just as mindful. And that's when you will go to maybe more prepared video packages and highlight packages that wouldn't have made the show because the game is carrying it. Now you start going back on some of those historical clips and bringing up some interesting statistics, graphically supported by your graphics team and things like that. You'll see broadcasts lean to those areas a lot more heavily when the game seems out of reach.
Right. Yeah, and just by the way, just thinking of the Oilers and their multi-goal comebacks, again, as a Kings fan, I can't even think about that right now. That's caused me too much pain in the last few years. But
Well, I'm not going to feel too sorry for you, Aidan, after the Kings reverse swept the Sharks and won the Stanley Cup.
fair
So
enough. I don't want to bring that up.
let it go.
Yeah, so for soccer, I know you obviously normally you have a full week before each match to study up in the Premier League and all that. Uh, but with the Sharks and the NHL, for example, when you're calling multiple games a week, how do you divvy up your study time, especially on a back-to-back when it comes to studying the opposing team?
Well, what I like to do is, later in the summer, after free agency and a lot of the trades occur in July, coming around the end of July, beginning of August, I start to put together my stuff for the next season, update rosters, get a lot of that just nuts and bolts stuff that I like to have down on my own sheets. I get that done as best I can. And of course, you have to tweak it later as you get to the actual games. But if I have those templates done, then I'm just plugging in things along the way. And, once you get into preseason and training camp and all that, the job it's a lifestyle job. It's totally consuming. My friends, once the season starts, it's easy to know where I am. All you have to do is look at the Sharks schedule, and I'm either in San Jose because we're on a homestand, or I'm on the road, and you can figure out exactly what city I'm in. You just have to follow the schedule. So it takes over your life, and you're also updating your information every day, even if it's just mentally by reading clips and staying in touch with the highlights of the games every night, watching games when you can. But once the season starts, I mean, I'm all consumed watching and doing the Sharks games. I rarely have time to watch other hockey. It does happen from time to time, but you're usually just so busy with your own team. But like on a back to back, as soon as we get on the plane to do the next game in the next city, I'm diving headfirst into that next team. I'm going back, looking at highlights maybe of their last 5 games. If there's time, maybe watch a period or two the next day in the hotel. But then you're probably going to the morning skate, getting your research done in the morning, coming back to the hotel in the afternoon. I like to grab a nap now as I've gotten older. It keeps my energy level up. People forget that it's a very odd job because you have to be at your best doing the broadcast at the end of your day. So most people get up 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, have some breakfast, grab a coffee, go to work, do their job, start at 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. Well, we don't really start our job till 7 or 7:30 at night, even though we also got up at 7 o'clock in the morning. So 12 hours into our day, we have to be at our best. And you have to adjust your life to that. And as you age and need more rest and things like that, you have to change it along the way. So I'm a napper now in the afternoons. And then, you wake up, get yourself ready, get to the arena, get yourself set up in the broadcast booth, maybe at 4:30, 5 o'clock for a 7 o'clock game. I'm already online, trying to get last minute information, talk to the broadcasters of the other team if I didn't already do that at the morning skate, and just try absorb as much information as I can. But again, because we're a Sharks driven telecast, we're going to be most focused on the Sharks. And then once the puck drops, you have to adjust to what kind of game it is. And you may end up talking a lot more about the other team, or if the Sharks are having a great game, you might end up talking primarily about them. And obviously my knowledge base, the depth of it is very Shark centric because I've done that game the night before. I've been with them for all the games that season. So I can speak to what's going on with our team a lot more clearly and, with good information than I can the other team. But I always believe it's important for our viewers to hear about the other side as well. And then, of course, going back to your thing, if all of a sudden the other team takes a 5-0 lead, you're going to be talking about them and their stars. So you better know what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And now a topic that not many announcers can talk about, but you can, being the voice of a video game or a few video games. Most notably in my childhood, NHL 2K11, I would play that on the iPad all the time. How strenuous are those recording sessions saying all those phrases all day long?
They were back in those days. It was tough, and I remember the first. It might have been the first game I did was NHL Blades of Steel '99, and that was on Nintendo and on PlayStation. So you'll remember the Nintendo, the plastic cartridge you'd insert into your game system, and then PlayStation was on a CD-ROM at that time,
Mm.
or maybe it was a DVD by then, but it was on a shiny disc, and the PlayStation disc could hold a lot more data than the Nintendo cartridge could. So we had to record that game twice, once for Nintendo. So like for Nintendo, it would be like, she shoots, he scores. You were trying to compress your call into a shorter time length because the data was so precious on that cartridge. They didn't have as much. But on the Sony PlayStation read, it would be, he shoots, he scores. They wanted you to stretch it out and be more natural
Yeah.
because they had all the memory capability back then. So those were long, long sessions. I mean, just to do that game, I think took me a week. And then the 2K games became much more intricate, and where the gameplay involved so many more options where you could build your own teams, and then there'd be historic team games and all that. And I think that first audio session for 2K probably took me 2 weeks, where I was driving up to the recording studios in North Bay in Novato, and I lived in Pleasanton at the time. So that was like at least an hour each way. And I was doing that 5 days a week for 2 weeks. I think I added it up. It took over 100 hours of recording time to do that game for me. And then Drew Mendo was color on that game, and his was way easier because he didn't have to have all the calls. So he came in maybe for 2 or 3 days and did his stuff. But I think it's much different now. And who knows, with AI now, I think they're going to be able to just take some basic reads from the play by play guy, or just import data from prior telecasts of any kind, and then through pushing a couple of buttons, create their games that way. So it's definitely changed and become a lot easier for the voices of the games to participate. But yeah, back in those days when we were doing some of the first ones, it was a job, but it was cool. We got
Yeah.
paid, and for me at the time, my sons were in their young teens at the most, and for them to be able to play video games with their dad doing it was pretty cool for them and their friends.
Yeah, that is really cool. And aside from the video games, we hear you in Inside Out, the Disney Pixar movie. And I know that the movie takes place in the Bay Area, but how did that all come about? How did you become the voice of hockey in Inside Out?
Well, John Lasseter was the producer of that movie and was the co-founder of Pixar Studios with Steve Jobs. And John Lasseter also owns his own winery.
Mm.
And my wife and I were involved in the Sonoma Valley Harvest Wine Auction every Labor Day weekend as auctioneers, primarily my wife, but I was doing a few things on stage as well. And we got to know John, and he knew what I did. And then when he decided to do Inside Out, and as you described, that movie, part of it, is a family that lives in San Francisco, and there was a hockey scene in there that required play by play. John said, "Well, let's do this authentically. I don't want some random voice doing the hockey play-by-play scene. I want the guy who does hockey in the Bay Area on TV to be the voice." So they just reached out to me, thanks to John having that as his mandate. And I get a random email, "Would you like to be in this movie?" And I'm like, okay. I mean, nobody knew that Inside Out was going to win the Academy Award for the best animated movie when it was in its infancy. So I went and recorded that recording session at Pixar in Emeryville, California, and the movie didn't come out for another couple of years. And then it became a box office sensation. And then Inside Out 2, which I had a brief part in as well, became the highest grossing animated feature of all time, passing many, many famous movies like Lion King. So just total luck. Very fortunate to be involved in something like that, and it's been a lot of fun. I got to go to Hollywood for both the premieres, and I met some of the other voice actors. Lewis Black in the second one, it was the voice of Anger, and bumped into him. Got to spend some time with him. Great guy, and a tremendous stand-up comedian as well as all the time you've seen him on Comedy Central and places like that. Bill Hader, Amy Poehler, actors like that were in the two movies, along with many others. So it was a lot of fun, and only movie I've ever done was the at that time was the first one, Inside Out, Academy Award, mic drop. And that's the way to start, I guess. Hopefully, I'll get a chance to do some more voiceover work in that in the future. We'll see.
Yeah, not a bad start at all. I mean, that's a good one for one there. I mean, that's not many people can say that. So it's definitely a mic drop situation. So
Yeah.
last couple of questions here. I know this may be a question that simply does not have an answer, but in your entire career so far, do you have an ultimate favorite moment? I know it seems impossible, but is there one?
Well, I mean, the first one, and these are going to be well. Actually, before hockey, an ultimate moment was doing the Men's World Cup in USA 1994, and being at these games. And I remember doing a game that involved the Nigerian team, and knowing that back in Nigeria, people were up at 3 o'clock in the morning. The whole country, Nigeria is the most populated country in Africa, and I'm guessing it's probably like 60 or 70 million people. And knowing that they're hanging on every play, and to be involved in broadcasts like that, I did in 1990 in Italy for TNT. I did a playoff game between Argentina and Brazil, and Diego Maradona set up Claudio Caniggia for the only goal of the game, 1-0 final. Argentina eliminating Brazil. I mean, two of the absolute soccer powers in the world to this day, and arch rivals in South America at that time. And that was a lifetime career highlight to be able to do a game like that. In the NHL, we talked about my involvement in trying to get the NHL to the Bay Area with NHL Hockey San Jose, and then to be able to call the first playoff series win, Game 7, 1994, the Sharks against Detroit, in Detroit, Jamie Baker scoring the winning goal halfway through the third period. That, to me, is still the biggest moment in Sharks history, because it was such an unlikely elimination of the number one seeded Red Wings, who were favored to win the Cup that year by this upstart franchise in only its third year, to make the playoffs, sneak in as the eighth seed, and then knock off the Red Wings in Detroit. There was never anything like it in the history of the NHL, something like that. So that still, for me, is the biggest game in franchise history and one of my biggest moments. But Game 7 against Las Vegas in 2019, when the Sharks were down 3-0 with about 10 minutes to go, and ended up coming from behind to win that game in overtime on Barclay Goodrow's goal. I've never experienced a moment of electricity like that, of sheer disbelief and joy when that happened. It was something that I'll never forget. The feeling was absolutely phenomenal. So glad I was able to call that game. So, if you want three career highlights, those would be there. And then, in the next category would be when the winning dog crossed the finish line on the Yukon River.
There you go. Yeah, I remember that Vegas game was my dad and I were watching it. I mean, that goes down as one of the best, I think, playoff games, at least in my lifetime, certainly in Sharks history. Could say ever. I mean, I mean, Game 7, oh, it's just that was amazing. That was unbelievable, super shocking. So you've checked off a lot of things on your announcer bucket list. What is something you still wish to accomplish?
Be sitting in the arena, and maybe doing a call for the Sharks' purposes, but to call the Sharks or be there when the Sharks win a Stanley Cup. And it's so hard. We're heading into year 34, and we've only been in one final. And as a Kings fan, I mean, you can appreciate the Kings came in 1967 expansion as one of the second six teams. and they didn't win that first one till what was it, 2012?
Yeah, it's 45 years.
It's such a long wait, and even for Toronto Maple Leafs fans, they haven't won since 1967,
Yeah.
and they've waited much longer than Sharks fans, but that's how long it's been for them. So if unless you were alive in '67 to enjoy that cup, all you know is waiting for a cup. So that would be for me. I can't think of anything else that isn't checked off on my list that I would want to be part of. That certainly would be it.
And with the young guys the Sharks have, and obviously the second overall pick again in the draft, certainly has a chance of happening pretty soon. I know they're going to be back up. I'm scared because these playoff matches against the Sharks were always, I mean, they're always fun, but they're always scary. So they've got a very, very bright future, obviously. So, I mean, what do you make of these guys? Celebrini, Smith, Eklund, and of course, obviously getting the second overall pick this year.
Yeah, it's a nice core of players. I think Macklin Celebrini, head and shoulders, is the franchise's best prospect, and had a tremendous rookie year. And I think Yaroslav Askarov is a goaltender that has an opportunity to be a championship goalie, and that's such a key piece. There's so many players within the organization, whether it's Shakir Mukhamadullin or Luca Cagnoni, or some others that we haven't seen as much of yet, like a Sam Dickinson or a Quentin Musty, and on and on and on. There's a lot of potential, but it is potential. And success at other levels does not necessarily always translate to that same success at the NHL level. So some players will get there, some will disappoint, others who you didn't expect will emerge and become key. And that's part of what makes it so fun, because you just don't know how it's all going to unfold or how long it will take. The Detroit Red Wings, led by Steve Yzerman, have been a great franchise, and they have some really good players. But I think they've gone now 9 years without being in the playoffs. It's really hard just to get into the playoffs. Never mind then put together a championship run. So fingers crossed, but really hopeful and very excited about what Mike Greer and his hockey operations staff and scouting staff and drafting acumen have been able to come up with so far in the trades they've made, et cetera. And very excited and hopeful for this coming season. I haven't looked forward to a coming season within the past season ever before, but even in April, in March and April, when you could see Celebrini and Smith and Eklund, working so well together, and others, Colin Graff, another guy that comes to mind, and young Jack Thompson, a defenseman who's got some promise. You could just see their fingerprints starting to appear on the scene and go like, I can't wait till these guys have another off season of training now that they've got some confidence under their belt heading into next year, which will be the 25-26 season. I've never felt that in the spring. And now over the summer, it's even more exciting, especially with the draft coming up. And then clearly some free agent signings the Sharks will make as well, and maybe some trades. We don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's scary for every other team, I'll tell you that. But anyway, Randy, that's all I got for you today. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Can't thank you enough for doing this. Thank you very much.
Nice talking to you, Aidan. Thanks for having me on, and good luck with your podcast.
Thank you. All right, everyone, that's it. My name's Aidan Michaels, and this was legendary broadcaster Randy Hahn. Thanks for watching.